Okay, so and if there are any questions or issues, just kind of bell her out. So the topic is the golden mean or the golden ratio, and it's a little hard to describe this in 2 or 3 words. In fact, it's impossible. There's several multiple components that we'll get to see here. It's really very fascinating. So number one, it is a ratio. It is a proportion. We'll talk that over. Another component of this is that this ratio appears commonly in structures throughout, in man-made items, in nature, all over the place, which is fascinating. We'll look at those features. It is very strong aesthetically. It's appealing to people, it seems, when this ratio is utilized in just multiple things that we view and do and see. Humans have had awareness of this ratio in what they do in art and architecture for thousands of years. It's documented with Egyptians, Greeks, and so on to current. And then the other really fascinating thing is that we'll look at is it's got a direct correlation with one of the most amazing and intriguing recognized mathematical sequences known to mankind. And there aren't very many of those. There are just a couple that are, recognized. Pythagorean's theorem, pi for figuring circles and all that, and then the golden mean, the golden proportion. Now, let me see if I need an arrow to forward this. Okay, it went. So first, I'm sorry for this, but this is just a brief math lesson, and that is on proportions. And so we have here a stack on the left that's tall, that's black, and a stack on the right that is white. And so a proportion is a ratio. And so the question here is, how much taller is the black stack on the left than the one on the right? And anybody can answer, but I'll just throw it in. The tall one, it's 1.5 times higher, right? It's half again higher, 1 cup higher. So the stack on the left is 1.5 times higher. So we have a ratio here of 1 on the right and 1.5 on the left, right? Correct?
Sir.
It must be bedtime. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to point out here is that in a ratio or proportion, you can describe it differently. And so my next question here is, well, okay, if you've got that tall stack, how much shorter is the short stack? And the one on the left, if you take away 1/3 of it, one of those cups, you'd have the one on the right. So if you've got the tall stack, the smaller one is 2/3 of the one on the left. So depending on whether you go down or up here, you have 2 ways to describe that. It's 1.5, the black one is 1.5 times higher. The white one on the right is 2/3 the size of the one on the left. So that's the only math thing to keep in mind, just because it is pertinent. The ratio is almost approximately 1 to 1.6. That's the golden ratio, okay? 1 compared to 1.6, and that can be whether you're talking about an inch or 1 football field versus 1.6 football fields, or whatever it is. That's the ratio we're looking at. And here it's put into, the ratio is put into a rectangle, so we can call this a golden rectangle, let's say. The number actually is 1.618. And so that we round it to 1.6 just to make it even. In fact, the number goes on forever. It's really 1.61803398887 and so on, but we're going to forget about that. So it's 1.618 thousandths, 1.6. There's only 3 numbers in this whole discussion you need to be thinking about and remember, and that's the first one is 1.6. Now, the thing with this is that
I'm
let's see,
reading the chapter.
Terry, you need to put it on mute. Thanks. So if you put this ratio into a line, what we see here is the blue is our 1, and the next segment is 1.6. So we're putting them end to end. The significant thing about this, you can take this a step farther and it goes on for infinity, and that is, in addition, there is another ratio here the same, and that is the red line compared to the entire line is also 1 to 1.6. Got that? So the blue line to this one is 1.6. If you take the red line and compare it to the whole thing from the start to finish, that also, the whole line is 1 to 1.6. And that can carry on forever. This is significant, and we'll talk about it here. The Greeks tended to talk about not the ratio, because they really didn't work with numbers like this, the mathematics, and multiply it out in a calculator. They called this the golden mean, and that's the point in the middle where, and as they described it, it's where the small is to the big as the big is to the whole thing. They looked at it, and that's the golden mean. The mean is more of a balance. If you look down here, it's a pleasant averaging, or sort of a balance, balancing point that happens to have that ratio on either side of it. The Greeks didn't, it isn't believed that the Greeks had these numbers. They didn't have the Arabic number system we have today. They had a more primitive number system that's more like Roman numerals, a little bit better than that. So they didn't have that, but they were able to visualize and recognize this proportion. They may have used circles and triangles and had different ways to sort of get to it, but they knew it and they used it extensively. They tended to make, in the sculptors would utilize the umbilicus, the belly button, as kind of as their 1, and then the 1.6 that we know today would go on up, and then they also would subdivide the neck and the width of the head, and also upper arm compared to forearm. They would keep that proportion, the diameter, let's say, and length and so on, in proportion there. Also diameter and length of the thigh and the lower leg. So here's another, if you look at the lower leg and then up to the umbilicus, there's another 1 and 1.6 here in the human figure. So they were well aware of this and utilized it. This is just a diagram. I don't know the date of this, but you can see where there is playing around with the comparison of the width, let's say, with the diameter of the base. And there also are, it's interesting, they've got other triangles and circles and things they're messing with here. So they did that, but they certainly utilized this in their pots and so on. The Egyptians also knew about this and utilized it, and actually it's been identified in a Egyptian piece of, I don't know if it was on rock or hieroglyphics or what it was, but and that was about 4,000 years ago. And then it's recognized that their structures that we see today do have the proportion within their structure. So they knew about this, were thinking about it. Again, we don't know anything else about it, but almost certainly probably not numbers and that, but they were able to figure it out and sense it and be aware of it internally. Back on up to, okay, this is, let's say, 500 years before the modern time, let's say 2,000 years ago, the Greeks. The Parthenon here is commonly evaluated for this, and it does seem again here that the dimensions that they made come very, very close to the golden proportion, and you can see then the height of the presumable height of the Parthenon would be 1, and the width here 1.6. But within the Parthenon, there are probably some other ratios, and that is if you take this bottom line, the right-hand side of it would be 1, the remainder on up to 1.6. So if you go to that 1 point and draw a line upwards, you have another smaller golden rectangle. And if you similarly take that smaller rectangle and go to the golden mean on that vertical line and draw a line across it, it makes a square in the bottom, and you have another golden rectangle up in the upper left corner, and so on. And then another little one right here in the midst of the upper left corner. So we start to see some really magical stuff when utilizing these numbers. I mean, how could you have a proportion like that that would move on and on inside a rectangle and beyond? We'll see that. This is a little representation of, we had the number, the first number that we're supposed to remember a little bit is 1.6, right? So we aren't, you know, this is a piece on a lathe here. We aren't so great at starting out with one piece. Nick or Carrie, you need to be on mute. If that's who it was. Maybe it was Gene. No, I'm just kidding. We don't normally put a piece on the lathe, then think we're going to add something on the other end of it to go to 1.6. We're going to go down the other direction. So it turns out that when you find this golden mean point on an individual item going down like this, the number, the ratio, and the number that we utilize for that precisely is 0.618. So 0.6 is the second number to remember here. That's one that we would utilize if we want to, it's 6/10, a little bit more than 6/10 of the distance between 0 on the left up to 1 on the right. So that's the way you find it. That's how it measures out when we're starting from one piece and going down. The third number to remember is coming up here now. This is the same 0.618, 6/1000ths or 6/10, let's say, 618 thousandths or 6/10. Here's half in the middle, here 3/4. We can kind of picture and visualize that. Pretty easy to picture 2/3, but look at 5/8 right here. 5/8 is really, really close to the golden. 5/8 for those that are in machining and used to this is the 0.625, 625 thousandths. So when we look at items and visualize them, the easiest way to do this is to kind of keep in mind this 5/8 proportion, and that leaves 3/8 on the other side. It's a tiny bit less than 5/8. But we can take that, and fortunately, you know, we're the only country in the world that doesn't use the decimal system, and so our, you know, inches and feet are actually antique and not real efficient, but it happens to work out okay for here because you've got 5/8 of an inch. You can figure out, you know, how much 3/8 is out of a foot fairly easily, and so on. 5/8. Oh, wait a second. Okay, sorry, here we go. So, who is that? I think what we're talking about here is the bunny, because the next thing we're going to get into is how you know, the golden mean and golden proportion were recognized then by Egyptians, by the Greeks, and utilized heavily. It really faded out when the Romans came in, and for about 1,000 years, it just wasn't in a lot of art, architecture, or awareness in our in cultures. However, in about 1200, there was a fella in Italy who was his name was well, he was given a name by his town of Bigalone, which is blockhead. His dad was Benazio, which is son of simpleton. So they weren't very kind to people at that time. This was blockhead, son of simpleton, and he kind of well, maybe that describes how he was at a certain time of his life when he was younger. His dad was stationed in Africa for a while, Northern Africa. He was educated by Muslims. He came back to Europe, to Italy, and as a 22-year-old, published and brought back to Europe the Arabic numeral system. That's our 1, 2, 3. 2 plus 2 is 3. 2 times 4 is 8. And so he actually brought this back to Europe and published it so that a lot of our forebears could have that as a mathematical way that we do things today. At the same time, he had this interesting little formula or mathematic problem that was published at the same time, and it goes like this. He pictured rabbits and pairs of rabbits, and you start out with a pair of rabbits. They have to grow to 2 months to reproduce. Then they have another pair, and then that pair, every month they each have a pair. So that each pair here is another pair. They have each one have more pairs a month later, and that goes on forever and ever. And he put this little problem. By the way, this blockhead, son of simpleton, was obviously brilliant. He put those together, and the rabbits come out, the rabbit pairs come out like this: 2 pairs, 3 pairs, 5, 8, 13, and so on. That's what happens if those rabbits multiply on out forever. These are the numbers you get. So we could leave that alone and go on to the next slide, but there's something really magical about this series of numbers. If you take any 2 numbers in the sequence, let's start with 3 plus 5. What's that equal? 8, the next one in the sequence. Take 8 and 13, add it together, you get 21. You come down here, the 46,000 da-da-da-da plus 75,000 da-da-da-da, it comes out exactly 121,000. So this goes on forever. It turns out that the ratio between 2 numbers here is 1.618, the golden ratio. I'm not going to go over this again because we kind of hit it with that Parthenon. If you start out with a golden rectangle, you divide it, you get a smaller one. You divide it, you get another smaller golden rectangle, another, and you do the same thing going the other way. It gets bigger and bigger. If you go to the center of each one of these squares, or a common point on the squares, what you get is a spiral, and this is well defined also, and is it goes on forever, and we call this the golden spiral. And so golden spiral, it comes out of that sequence, 1 to 1.618, da-da-da-da. So it turns out that this golden spiral on a lot of these dimensions are seen widely in nature. This is called phyllotaxis. It's how the leaves come out on the stem of a plant, which direction they're going. And it ends up that they come out different directions in kind of a spiralar form, and that follows a golden path. These leaves, as they're coming out of a bud here, follow in a golden sequence also. Those numbers, the first ones, remember, it was 3, 5, and 8, and 13. These numbers show up a lot. Here's 5 seeds in an apple. These are petals on flowers. 3 here, 5, 8. Now, this isn't all petals. It isn't exactly right, but it is extremely common and unbelievably so. In a flower, these are actually little florets, but they develop seeds, so we'll call it a seed head. These come out in a pathway that matches the golden spiral. If you look at this one in the upper right, this is sort of a, you get drifted or carried away with the spirals going in that direction, but there are spirals, golden spirals going another direction. If you look over on the right-hand side, you can start on them here and get your eyes trained and focused and try to go backwards and visualizing another set of them right within the same flower head. Pineapples, very, very similar. We have golden spirals going around the pineapples. On the left-hand side, someone has put little tacks in to mark the spirals. And there are actually 3 sets of spirals going around on pineapples in different directions, right with what we're seeing there. Here from the top view is a plant with a similar golden spiral pathway. Here is an astronomical picture of a large weather front, and so on a global scale, we're seeing similar logarithmic golden spiral features even up in the atmosphere. Tornadoes, a similar situation. Why does the golden ratio seem to be in nature everywhere? We don't really know. Astronomers have taken the paths of the planets and sort of compressed them into one plane, which they aren't actually all in one plane. But if you do that, then you get a golden spiral pathway. Jerry showed me a video here, and this is similar to what our Greek sculptors 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, were doing and figuring out, and that's the golden ratio here for the upper arm and lower arm. And keep in mind, again, there is this ratio of the red to the whole also that the Greeks, readily understood within this. Same thing here. Short, and the Greeks would say short blue to the red as the red is to the whole. Golden mean. You do that when you don't have a ruler or a calculator. Same thing on the hand. Same thing on the phalanxes of the fingers. This is kind of a similar thing we looked at with as the Greeks pictured it, and I'm not sure when this one was done. You've got someone playing around with golden ratio on an image, on a face, human face. The ear and sound is very interesting. The outer ear has a golden spiral kind of logarithmic curve. And actually, there seems to be some matching with actually sound waves and sounds that are entering the ear. And I don't know if I have a picture of it here, but the labyrinth, the little seashell-like things in the inner ears that help keep our balance, they have a logarithmic shape also. You don't really you can't see that in here. Folks have taken a look at different parts of the body to try to, see if it's there. On the left here, this is the presumed path of subatomic particles as they jiggle and wiggle around. We have what looks like a DNA helix on the right, logarithmic golden spiral. This is sort of an image that shows the microscopic DNA and a galaxy size, pattern, similar. Musical instruments, the size of the instruments. There's some playing around with that. The music goes a little bit farther than this, because if you look here, okay, there are 3 black keys. That's one of the Fibonacci sequence. By the way, I didn't give that a name. The guy's name actually was given Fibonacci. That was the fellow that came up with all those numbers and the rabbits. So 3 is in the sequence. There are actually 5 black keys altogether. That's the next one. There are 8 keys altogether in an octave. And there's some playing around with the musical pitches that have some very fascinating correlations with the sequence and the spiral. So the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio, the golden mean, was picked up again in the Renaissance. Leonardo da Vinci worked on this significantly and put it into his portraits, the sculptings he did. Lots of other artists picked this up, and it really was a pretty significant fad in the Renaissance. It was well recognized exactly what it was and what they were doing. You see this put into place to gain balance in a photograph of John F. Kennedy. It isn't always the best to put the dominant subject right in the center, and you can get some nice effects when it's placed in a balanced manner otherwise. Going way back in the Earth's history, the Nautilus, ancient sea life from millions of years ago, they have this the golden sequence. I'm gonna miss those. I'm not going to go into it, but triangles and circles can be tied into this. That's way. So we're gonna touch on shapes of things that we might get into, and then look at a few items is everybody on board here? Are there any questions so far? Can you all hear okay?
Yep, I got you.
We're good.
Oh, good. Okay.
But it's something if
Okay.
nobody heard any of that, wouldn't it, Ray?
That would have been something. I would have had a good time doing it.
We got you loud and clear. I did mute everybody just because we were getting some background.
Okay. Okay, sure. Okay, so I'll get on with it here. And then Bill, after this slide, then I'll open it back up for discussion, because I'm going to have the congregation make commentary. So on this slide here, just briefly, this third part here, you can take a look. There are comparisons that we can pretty easily, look at. The width of the item with the width of the lip and the width of the base. Keep in mind this lip has been further subdivided into the inner part and the outer flare of the lip. Just worth kind of looking at that. Then you have things such as the height, of the entire item compared to where the widest point is. And so there are, these are the types of proportions that we can, look at. There are other topics that gets into a much more analysis, and that has to do with how are these points tied together. You can have the width of the neck and the width of the width and the location of the widest point, but the curves that connect those can vary. And that's another little topic. So next, I'm just going to bring up, show some photos of some turnings. And the one thing I figured kind of early, I wasn't going to come up with a turning and do microscopic measurements of something to come as close as I can to a golden turning, because I think at least for me, it's just inappropriate. Now Leonardo da Vinci did it, so I think it's okay if you want to seek that out. But it shouldn't necessarily be a goal to have everything be a golden dimension. That certainly would take away from a lot of very beautiful items and artworks and turnings that don't need to be denigrated because they don't match the golden shapes. So this is, I think it's something that it's worth having this in the background, but not necessarily be a driving force. So with that in mind, I'm going to go on here, and Bill, you can use your own judgment or however, but what I'm going to do is show a turning and then just ask anybody to kind of comment on how it might be not a golden proportion, just so we can visualize this without having to get a tape measure out to see if we're exactly right on the button. That's kind of my thought. So here we go. I'm just going to turn it over to whoever wants to comment, and Bill, you can help out there if there's a better way to do that. But
Well,
anybody
I think, go ahead. Anybody wants to comment? By the way, I didn't mute everyone, so push your space bar or unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Ray, this is Bob Madison. As we were sitting here talking, or as you were sitting there talking, I was thinking of like segmented turning. And a lot of the feature rings seem to be, as you're indicating, about that 2/3 or 0.61 or whatever up there.
mhm.
In this particular one, it looks like the bottom portion of it sort of fits the golden mean that you're talking about. But then they've added another part on the top that looks like it's about half. So I don't know.
Well,
Yeah,
guess
I think
Jerry,
that's
me. This is a beautiful piece, but it does not really fit the golden mean, which I think is what you were just saying, Ray, that you don't have to take a tape measure or calipers or anything to have a beautiful piece, because this one still is, even though, in my opinion, it doesn't really fit the golden mean.
okay. Any other dimensions here that you can look at that may not fit? I can see another one or two. What about the narrowest spot?
The neck sort of stands out, and it's sort of way at the top. I mean, where a neck should be or whatever.
Right.
But
Right. It's not at, the 0.61. Sure. That's what I was getting at. That's right. The interestingly on this, I kind of wonder if the bottom and the widest part might be in proportion. And I was looking at this one, it almost seems like if you just looked at the top and bottom, those two might actually be in proportion, the top and bottom. But the neck is narrow and the center part is wide. And I will point out here that Cleo's dad and mom and Cleo that have been on do pottery. And this was a gift from a very popular and extremely well-known high-end potter that's nationally recognized. And he can do his thing fine without having everything the golden mean. And then I'm going to take this just a little step farther. And, you know, we turn items and think that it's the end product, right? We think that's the top dog in the world, right, after we've done them. But, you know, you can do different things with them. And my wife just had this in the pot above it. And I said, well, I'm going to take a picture of that whole thing because it changes the pot when you do that. And it actually makes the pot fit nicer, I think. And you might have some proportions from the top of this, the things that are in there on the top, whatever you call that. You know, that might be in a proportion to the widest part of the pot, similar to the golden mean or golden proportion. I don't know. Okay, this is another one. So what does anybody see there? Should I self-critique it? So the neck is narrower than the widest part if you're looking at the proportion. This is more like maybe a quarter the distance of the wide part here. Also, the widest part here seems lower. It's greater than 5/8 here, and this is not 3/8. It's more closer to a quarter. So those dimensions are off. If comparing it to the golden mean, the golden proportion. The base might be about right compared to the width of the body, just maybe. Any other thoughts there?
I like it.
Thanks. That's one I did at least a decade ago out of a hickory. Then again, this kind of changes things. You know, that the additives can probably rebalance some things or change the balance. What about this one? I'm not going to say what's wrong with it, but how doesn't it fit the golden proportions? If you were trying to achieve golden proportions, what would you do differently?
It seems a little tall.
Okay.
It also
It
seems
seems-
like it's rather narrow at the bottom and doesn't change a whole lot there. I happen to like the piece, but it's certainly not a golden ratio.
See, I think both those describe it. And what would actually fix this would be if the body happened to be wider, then it would be in better proportion to the base, the top, and the neck. All of the others would come into view a little bit. Then it wouldn't look as tall. It would be see, you mentioned tall, and that's because this bottom is narrower. So yeah, making the body wider would probably bring it all into proportion. And you guys have seen me turn these before. You know, this I've got to go with what the design is on the outside, and I can't go bigger than that. I've got to be right on the button. And the other thing is, I've only twice in my life seen a walnut with sapsucker and woodpecker marks in it. And again, Joe and Christy, Cleo's dad, was cutting wood up in their area, Mineral Point, and came up with this. I was out there with him and found this in the firewood he was cutting up and grabbed it. Okay, what do you think here? I'll just make some commentary here. I think this one is in really nice proportion. Now, if you look at the, I just, there's something I really like about the upper dimension compared to the base. And again, I haven't measured it out, but I'm going to venture to say that base is pretty close to the smaller dimension, the 0.3, the 3/8. And then the other thing is here, well, you're not going to have a golden proportion in a bowl like this. There are different shapes that really look better. This narrow spot down at the bottom, you're not going to put that, 3/8 of the way up the piece. It's just not going to be right for a bowl. And so it sort of doesn't fit for a piece like this, but the base and the top to me sort of does. Any thoughts there at all? Nice piece, Joe. And I didn't show the inside. That is just unbelievably colorful here. This is a piece that's done by was done by a member of our club that is not present, and it follows kind of a typical shape. And Steve, you're used to this sort of thing, and so let's have some commentary on this one. I'm really fascinated and got some ideas. That might be a piece of wood I gave you, Steve. I don't know, one of those woodpecker pieces. But what does anybody have to say about this one? And we're just about at the end here too. Steve, are you there?
Yeah, it's missing a top.
Oh, it's missing a top. Okay, you got narrow, you're saying.
Yeah, the proportions, I don't see the golden mean in that one anywhere.
Yeah, I didn't, other than, yeah, that's the narrowing. I tell you what, it's got a terribly, it would have been really a bummer to turn this and come up with it, but it's got a really bad, troublesome inclusion at the very top there. It came out nice, but I could see when I look at this thing, there was big trouble up there at the top, and I bet that's partly what got into
I can
this.
make the comment that this probably is a good illustration of why I tell my students, don't let the wood seduce you.
Yeah. Oh, so keep that commentary going then. What do you mean by that?
In other words, too much of the features of the wood contributed to the shape of the vessel, and it should never ever be that way.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, I do that a lot. So I've got lots of different shapes, and it's sort of an addiction to get the colors and things sometimes to come out. But that's a good thought. So, my thought on this one, I was looking at it for a long time, and the one thing in these shapes, and Steve, you do these too, but the one thing that really does fit in, and I didn't think about this till way at the end of the preparation of my talk, that the shape of the side of this thing is quite possibly a little ways out on a logarithmic spiral. If you look, the angle here is sharper, and then it's getting less and less as you go all along. There's a little breaking point right here. And that breaking point where that spiral changes to have it come in the top is pretty darn close in itself to a good, in a good spot. So I'm willing to say that this is pretty close to a logarithmic or golden spiral shape. There's a continual change in the angulation of that curve. I think I might be about done here. So I'll just open it up for any questions, and Bill, you can take over when you want. Any questions or comments? And I'm done.
Okay. You just stop sharing your screen from your end.
Okay, I've got to see how to do, oh, I got it. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Very well done, Ray. I was
Thank you.
fascinated. Thank you.
All right, I think everybody should have their view back now. Any other comments, any questions for Ray? Ray, I personally want to thank you for doing that tonight. I thought that was very interesting. Kind of shows you where the numerologists come from when they're looking at things. So I thought that was very interesting. Like to thank all of our
Very
guests
here, I
for
hope that
attending.
as people wander through the woods and just look at the world, that you might bear this in the back of your mind and say, wait a minute, yeah, Ray was right. Look at this, look at that. And it's everywhere, as you said, Ray.
Yeah, I think as you look around, you'll find that all over the place. It's just something we kind of take for granted and don't necessarily consider. But I think if you start opening your eyes to it, you will. Any other questions that we have, or any comments that need to be made? Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up for this evening.
I do have one question for Ray. Ray, when you do your turning, do you do the math ahead of time, or do you make something that looks pleasing to the eye and all of a sudden the math turns out?
I definitely, is my sound coming through?
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely just turn by my eye and do what looks and feels right. I know on my vases, I'll work on that significantly as I'm taking them down, and I'll usually do the bottom end of the vase first, and in a rough manner, and then narrow down the top, and oftentimes I'll get the right length on the neck and the opening, but I've left myself some room so I can go up or down. And then so I know my width, I know the bottom shape, and then I'll fine tune the neck from the bottom down and then the top down, bottom up and top down, and start to get those to blend. And I don't do any woodworking from a pattern. I'll have some rough ideas, and maybe I have some dimension if it's got to fit in somewhere, but everything I do is just I do it from scratch. And so I wouldn't want to do the numbers. I respect the segmented turners that figure out what they want ahead of time and do it. That's pretty fine art, and I got a high degree of respect for that for sure. But I do mine differently. Yeah, wing it.